The Human Rights Commission has called on the government to release more than 5,000 asylum seekers currently held in detention centres around Australia. The Commission argues that mandatory detention is failing to deter the asylum boat traffic and that unless asylum seekers pose an unacceptable security risk, they should be placed as a matter of urgency in the community. Kerry Brewster reports.
While visiting 4 detention facilities this year, the Commission says it observed alarming levels of despair amongst people experiencing what it calls the devastating human impact of prolonged and indefinite detention.
We see very troubled people, people obviously suffering mental ill health, children whose potential for development is almost certainly being undermined. People who fled here believing that they were bringing their families to a new and brighter future and who spent their time in remote parts of Australia behind fences. These are things I think that if the Australian people saw them more directly would seriously trouble them.
By contrast, the Commission found that the 1,000 or so asylum seekers living in the community at any time were happier, healthier and cheaper to process. Mandatory detention should be abandoned, says its president.
After the quick initial checks, we think every person should be considered individually for a community arrangement. We ought not to be detaining people who we've got no reason to think would be a danger to our community if they lived with us.
But Immigration Minister Chris Bowen says the government has got it right.
Obviously, we continue to process people in a variety of ways, including in the community, and that involves, we've already moved over 4,000 people into the community under the community detention program. We'll continue to do that for as long as we have boat arrivals coming to Australia, because I do think it's not appropriate just to continually expand detention centres and keep people in detention right to the end of their process.
But there is no end to the process for more than 50 Sri Lankans who, after receiving adverse ASIO security assessments, are locked up indefinitely with no right of appeal.
My staff were indeed deeply disturbed simply by their experience of speaking with them. They were so desperate about their circumstances.
They include 33-year-old widow and mother Ranjini Perenparasa, whose plight and that of her young sons was reported by Lateline in May.
So to hear the news that she'd been taken to Sydney detention camp was very upsetting.
Ranjini had fled Sri Lanka's brutal civil war. Granted refugee status, she'd lived in Brisbane for a year and remarried. In May, pregnant with her 3rd child, she and her boys were taken to Villawood Detention Centre.
I feel very sorry for her. I've had 2 kids of my own, and to see a pregnant woman suffer like that, be isolated from the community, is very, very sad.
Her friend, activist Sarah Nathan, visited Ranjini last weekend.
She's very anxious. She's forever hoping that something will change, that the Australian policy would change, and that she would have the right of appeal, and that the world can see she is no threat to anyone.
Melbourne human rights lawyer David Mann has taken her case and others to the High Court to test whether the government can lock up refugees indefinitely without independent review. Kerry Brewster, Lateline.